Alright, so we have right here probably one of my favorite milkweeds. This is four-leaf milkweed. And it's called that because of these leaves right here. So notice 1, 2, 3, 4. Now really what it is, it's opposite, but it's kind of, they're smushed together essentially. You notice the rest of the leaves up here, these two are opposite. These down here are opposite. These little round ones at the bottom are opposite. But it's called four-leaf milkweed, Asclepias quadrifolia. And this is a woodland species. And you typically find it in not a moist woodland, but usually an open woodland. So kind of a drier woodland. And there's kind of some conflicting reports about whether they're rhizomatous or not. I kind of think that they are, at least a little bit, because they do occasionally form little colonies. This spot's actually got quite a few of them. And when they're really, really happy in kind of this open environment, you'll get something like this. You'll have a plant that has lots and lots of blooms on it. Unfortunately, this one is another one that is really not very commercially available at all. It's very, very difficult to find. This particular spot, I actually can get seeds every so often. So if you're really, really interested in this species, you can, of course, message me, and I may actually have a few. But this right here, these are the flowers. So this is the typical hoods and horns. So milkweeds are basically next to orchids in the complexity of their flowers. So hopefully I'm going to grab a few of these and look at them under the dissecting scope so you can actually see some of the parts a little bit more easily. Just looking at them with this camera that I have, it's harder to see, but you can see that there are 5 parts. And that's what tells you it's a eudicot right there. It still has a milky sap. Like most milkweeds, it is fed on by most of the normal milkweed predators, milkweed bugs. The typical pollinators seem to be small butterflies in the spring, at least that's what I've seen. Although over here, that appears to be an ant. They do produce a lot of nectar, much like many of the other members of the milkweed family, the Apocinaceae. But you notice that I've actually got quite a big clump of these. And this is one of the few places I know of that you can actually find a lot of these all growing together. There's another one over there, right there, that hasn't even started blooming yet. Okay, so to look a little bit closer at the four-leaf milkweed, this is one of the plants, and notice this is on a roadside. They like a well-drained, kind of rocky, open forest. But they, unlike a lot of milkweeds, they have this, a lot of milkweeds, they kind of have a round ball of individual flowers. This one's kind of an umbel that hangs down. So these are really, really cute. I think they're very pretty, and they vary from white to kind of pinkish. So notice here, these are actually the petals, and there are actually sepals behind them, but they're really hard to see because the petals reflex all the way back. So I'll show you some of the anatomy a little bit closer up. So this is under the dissecting scope, so notice the petals here have reflexed back. This whole structure right here is called the corona, and it's made up of 2 major parts. The hood, which is back here, and then there's a little spiky thing, which is a horn. It looks a little bit more like a claw. There's a gynostegium under here. The anthers have been converted into pollinia, and they're actually between each of these combination hoods and horns, and there's actually a stigmatic slit between them. It's very complicated, at least close to the complexity that you would see in orchids. So here's from the top down. So I took this to spread the petals out so you can see that there are 5 petals back here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are sepals behind those petals, but they're hard to see. I've got a longitudinal section. So this is the hood right here. And then these kind of claw-like structures kind of coming from the middle of the hood are called horns. And in individual milkweed species, they can vary in size. Hoods can be longer, horns can be almost gone. So where the pollinia are, there's a little dark speck right here. And that's basically what's called the gland. And an insect will actually take its claw, its jointed leg with the claws on it, can actually pull that out. And then it has to be inserted back into kind of a similar spot called the stigmatic slit that's right there, which is unfortunately really hard to see. So I've cut this one into a longitudinal section. So you can see here we've got the hood from the side. This is the horn. This is basically right here where the pollinia is, basically the glands up here, and the two parts of the pollinia are down here. This is the gynostegium here. They actually have two carpels in each flower, and they're not fused. So these are apocarpous. So two carpels. But this gynostegium up here, basically, the pollinia can attach here, and then the pollen grains can grow down into the actual ovules that are inside here. So we've got two carpels here, and with this longitudinal section, you can actually see the sepals, and they're kind of hidden underneath. There's a sepal here, there's a sepal here. They're hidden underneath these big petals over here. And this is the stalk, this is the peduncle back here that attaches to that whole umbel that we saw earlier. So fairly complicated. This is one of the actual whole pollinaria. This is the pollinia on each side. This contains the pollen grains. So these are the translator arms, and this is the gland up here. And this again has to be pulled out of this little region between the two, between hoods. And then it has to be inserted basically back in here, so it'll stick to an insect's leg, usually by the gland, which is kind of sticky, and then the insect can put it back in. This is one of the reasons why most milkweeds have super low pollination rates, because it's very unlikely for that to happen. So an individual plant, even though it's got all of those flowers, go back for a second up here. I think this individual plant's got all these flowers, and each flower's got 5 basically slots where those pollinia could go. An individual plant most of the time will produce maybe 1, 2 follicles, the fruits at the end, because they have this relatively low pollination rate. That apparently works well enough. These particular plants come from private land, and there's so many of them that actually, many more of them than normal actually get produce fruits. So this is a beautiful plant, one of my favorites. It's a really unusual milkweed because it's a milkweed of kind of shaded environments, very hard to find in cultivation, unfortunately. The other thing that's interesting about them is their seeds are actually hypogeous, meaning that the cotyledons stay under the ground. And it's very unusual. Most milkweeds, their cotyledons are epigeous, so that there's something different about this particular species of milkweed that it does that. I have no idea why. But anyway, if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and I'll try to make more.